What does it take to have a successful transformation?
You cannot do a sneaky transformation. The most essential thing in any transformation is having a team of champions.
How do we keep everyone aligned?
The entire organization is in the product operating model, but not everybody is on a product team.
Hey, welcome to The Product Experience. I'm Lily Smith.
And I'm Randy Silver. And this week we're talking about transformation. And you know what they say about transformation, right?
Oh no, Randy, I'm afraid to ask.
There's more than meets the eye.
Oh, but as we're not actually robots in disguise, we've grabbed Jen Swanson, CEO of Tuckpoint Advisory Group and a veteran of many transformations. And we talked about why it goes wrong,
Who's on a product team versus working in the product model, and how to make your transformation a success.
Jen, thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much, Randy and Lily.
So for anyone who doesn't already know you, can you just give us a quick introduction?
Sure.
How did you get into product in the first place, and what are you doing these days?
Excellent. Sure. So my name is Jen Swanson, and I am the CEO of Tuckpoint Advisory Group. And that's what I'm doing now. But I have, just like I think just about everybody in product, the long and winding road through product. I started my career in education, and I use a lot of my education degree helping people learn all about product operating models or product-led operating models. But I spent most of my career on the client side, or, working in organizations, doing customer experience type roles and what we would call now product delivery roles. Although back in the day, I've been around for a while, back in the day, we weren't calling them product delivery roles. We called them lots of different things. But I really got into this probably in the early aughts when I was working for Capella University. And we were trying out lots of different things with customer experience design. And actually, Capella brought IDEO in to learn customer experience design from IDEO. And I got bit by the bug in customer experience design, and we were starting to experiment with product teams. And I just sort of never looked back. I couldn't kind of get myself out of that work because it was so natural to sort of how I thought and acted and wanted to work for the rest of my life. And I just kept doing more of it and going deeper and deeper into it. And now I've built a whole company around it because I just sort of can't get enough. So.
Fantastic. And we're here today to talk about transformation, and it's something you've been through a few times. It's something that Tuckpoint does a lot around. I know you've got some other associates at Tuckpoint that are friends of ours and people, other coaches and consultants that we know. But before we get into how to do transformation, I want to talk about what transformation actually is, if that's all right.
Sure.
The word gets thrown around a lot. So when is something transformation? When is it change? When is it evolution? Transformation is just one of those things that we don't always know what it actually is.
Sure. I think that all of those words you just used are probably degrees of the same thing, right? Organizations are always transforming. They are always changing. They're always moving. They're living things because organizations are made up of people. And, people are these tricky things, right? We all sort of wake up every day having learned and grown from whatever we learned yesterday. And so if you think about organizations are made up of people, lots of people, some really big organizations, some really small organizations, but that learning and growing and developing means that there's sort of lots of change happening over time. Now, that change can kind of happen intentionally or unintentionally, but it's always happening, right? And so remember that I think there was a phrase like back in the 90s, change or die, right? Wasn't that, I think that was like a catchphrase. And so now it's probably transform or die or something like that. But I think that again, like whether or not it's change might be a small scale change. Evolution might be a gradual amount of change. Transformation could be a really big change, but it's all sort of pieces of that it's all sort of different ways to look at that idea of evolution or maybe revolution over time, trying to get to some future state that's been defined. So, Randy, I don't know if and Lily, I don't know if you guys were at Mind the Product a couple of years ago. Janice Frazier was one of the keynote speakers. Do you guys remember her? She was talking about her book, Further, Faster, and Far Less Drama. I always get tripped up on that title. But one of the concepts in that book, and I've gotten to know Janice since that talk, is this idea of honest orientation. So this idea of like, you got to know where you are to know where you're going. And I think that's the piece with transformation that's a lot of times kind of missing, is people spend so much time thinking about like, oh, we got to change, we got to transform, we've got to evolve, but nobody's really paying attention to where they are right now. And I think that that's the part about transformation that gets everybody kind of tripped up, is they're also concerned about transforming that nobody's thinking about, well, it's like a from to, right? You got to think about where you are today, so you know where you're trying to transform to. And I think that's the part sometimes that gets sort of confusing in all of this transformation talk.
And I think also, I feel like you hit the nail on the head of what, like, my understanding of when lots of people talk about transformation and digital transformation, or, you know, transforming to a product-led product operating model or something like that, that it is very intentional. It's it's not a kind of, oh, we're just morphing into this other thing. It's like, we know we're in some place.
Yes.
And we need to be somewhere else.
Yes.
And we need to go through that. That transformation is a process, and there's a feeling that there's an end to that transformation as well. It's like there's an end state that people are trying to get to.
Well, and the opposite of that too is the assumption is too that every organization starts at square zero and they get to the end. It's like everybody sort of assumes it's like a Candyland, right? Where there's like, you start at the beginning and you get to that little rainbow thing with the chest of candy where it's all coming out, and then the game is over, and then you pack up the board and you're going to like leave and go, instead of it being like Monopoly, where you're just going to kind of keep going around and you're going to keep picking up money and hotels and all the rest of it, right? Like transformation is digital transformation, operating model transformation is kind of one of those things where you could kind of play it for a long time, because you're going to kind of constantly be evolving. And the question is, how intentional are you going to be along that path, or are you just going to let it happen? You know?
It also like really reminded me as well of, is it a Patrick Lencioni thing with the storming, forming, norming, you know, the cycles that teams go through?
Yes.
I don't know if I credited that correctly.
Forming, storming. Yeah, we might have to look it up afterwards and go back and edit it back in. Yes.
But yeah, it kind of reminds me of that, but just on a much grander scale. And again, like you say, much more intentional. And I think you had talked to Randy before about transformation theater. So tell us a bit about what that is.
Well, so transformation theater, I think, is one of the things that happens when companies and especially leaders get this idea of like, we must transform, you know, and I'm using a very serious face for the people who are just listening to this right now, the ones watching on YouTube. And the way that I have seen transformation theater show up, well, first of all, let me define it, right? Transformation theater in my definition is this idea of pretending to change while you're actually keeping everything the same. Okay. So the way that I have personally seen this show up, and I will say that I've seen this show up in clients. I've also seen this show up when I was working as well on the client side. One is where a company will say, well, we've done an agile transformation, right? And what that means is they've walked around with like magic wands or pixie dust, and they've kind of sprinkled it on top of waterfall teams. And they've been like, you get an agile team, and you get an agile team, and you get an agile team. But they haven't actually changed anything. They haven't changed any ownership constructs, right? They haven't changed any sort of, they haven't changed anything. So it was a project team on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, it's an agile team. And the only thing they've changed is maybe delivery timelines, but they haven't changed what they own. They haven't changed necessarily who's working on it. They haven't changed any sort of cross-functional collaboration. They've just said, now you're an agile team, right? Well, that's not really changing anything, right? It's just saying that you're an agile team, right? Or another one that is my personal favorite and I actually live this personally, is being on an innovation center of excellence, right? So you go through and you say, I know Randy, right? Randy's making a face with me on this one, where they're like, you're going to go be an innovation team. So we want you to go be innovative and be really smart and come up with, brand new things, but it's totally devoid of the core product delivery. So you've got a team over here innovating shiny object features that are completely divorced from, existing product experience. And then I don't know what is expected and who's going to knit those things together, but somehow magically it's all going to come together. That's not really fixing any kind of core problems. And another one that I also, maybe this is just a way for me doing therapy, because actually all three of these have been things I've witnessed both firsthand on when I was working as well as seeing it with clients, but where clients will say, we really want to be customer focused, right? Because that's a really big part of being a product-led organization or being a product-led operating model. And so the whole organization will sort of spend all this time and money getting customer insights and going deep with customer, they'll do ethnographies and they'll start talking to customers. But at no time do any of those insights actually make it to the engineering team that is actually coding the site, that they're coding the products that they're delivering, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's this illusion. Transformation theater is the illusion of progress that actually is just reinforcing all of that legacy structures that are causing the stall of delivery, speed, or stall of change, or stall of whatever it is that's sort of getting in the way of true transformation. And so it's super frustrating, right? Because not only is the thing not fixing the problem, but it's actually reinforcing the thing that's supposed to be, getting fixed. And it's super frustrating for people on the front lines who are screaming out for the change, and for those of us who are trying to help organizations through the change.
Do you think that sometimes maybe for the people on the floor, experiencing transformation, it might feel like transformation theater when you're going through it, because it is very difficult and it's quite a long process, especially in a big organization, but even in smaller organizations to really, really change the makeup of a company when processes and the way people work can be so ingrained. I imagine for lots of people, even if there is progress being made, it can feel like just transformation theater as opposed to real change.
I think it can feel that way. I do think that one of the pieces that, when healthy transformation happens, I think a really big part of that healthy transformation is a strong commitment and involvement from the executive level, right? That is a big part of it, that executive commitment there, that it's not something where leadership says, well, just go over and fix them. Can you just go over and help them figure it out? Because we're fine, but they have the problem, right? But it is I think a real healthy transformation, digital transformation, operating model transformation is leadership that comes forward and says, this is something we all have to take part in, right? This is a change for the whole company, right? Whatever that transformation is. And I think a big part of that responsibility from leadership's perspective is communication of sort of what that's going to look like, communicating a roadmap. I know this is going to sound familiar, right? Because it's productizing the change to a certain extent, right? But we talk a lot about this idea of change leadership, not change management, because change management is managing the check boxes on a list of things you have to do for the change. But change leadership is really stepping into that to say, there are behaviors that are going to have to shift. There's mindsets that are going to have to shift. And there's a lot going on at any given time that you might not see, but we all need to have trust and faith that we're all working on it together. And so I do think that communication has to be there so that the people on the front lines, right, on the floor, don't feel alone in that change, so that the people in the middle don't feel alone in that change, right? Because I think when you start to feel man, I am the only person carrying water on this, or we're the only team carrying water on this, that's when you start to feel like, man, is this worth it? Why are we doing this? But if you can start to feel like, hey, this is hard, but I'm doing my part, and I know that other people are doing their part, and we're all sort of like in it together, that's when I think resistance to change is most easily overcome. But that's, I think, the difference between change management and change leadership, when you have that at the top of people saying, this is something we're all in together and we all have different roles in it, but we're all going to take it on together. Does that answer your question, Lily?
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I'm going to speak for her on that one. I'm also going to jump in to say, Lily and I were both furiously Googling right after we got to the forming, storming, norming things, and Bruce Tuckman, not Lencioni for that one.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
And I think you may have you've started to touch on my next question already. There's one example I've seen where we fall into the trap again and again, and that's when leadership has the idea of, let's you change. Everyone else needs to change and I don't.
Right.
But aside from that, which you just talked about for a couple moments there, why do we keep messing this up in organizations? We've got really good intentions. No one goes into these transformations, especially when they call it a transformation and they throw money and time and effort behind it. They go in with really good intentions.
Yeah.
Why do we still screw it up? Well,
because I think if we go back to that like transformation theater, all of those activities feel like the right things to do, right? Those things feel good, right? Oh, let's have an innovation center. Let's experiment with Agile. Let's, customer obsession. Hey, man, I read about that in HBR, right? Like, let's do that, right? They all feel really good. But the problem is that most organizations that are older than, say, 30 years old, right? And, we always kind of joke on our team about like what really is the definition of a legacy organization, because I think you can talk to companies in Silicon Valley who have been around for more than 20 years, and they think of themselves as like legacy, because if you're in Silicon Valley and you've been around for 20 years, you've seen some stuff, and so like you think you're legacy, right? But then you talk to some financial services companies that have been around for 150 years. They've seen some stuff too, right? They're a different category of legacy. So, but any kind of company that's been around for a while, right? Been around since, say, the 80s or early 90s. They've probably been built with some pretty rigid structures and hierarchies, right? And those kinds of organizations, they don't do cross-functional collaboration and the evolution particularly well. So then when you come in and you're like, okay, transformation, we're going to actually start to break down those silos, that feels pretty scary. That feels risky. That feels vulnerable. That feels like a lot of work. Let's be honest with you, right? And these are companies that I don't think any company in the year of our Lord 2025 can afford to just be like, oh yeah, let's just try some stuff, right? Everybody is trying to make money, right? And it's not easy right now, no matter what part of the economy you're in. And so to balance that like external pressure to perform at the same time that you're going to do something hard and scary and vulnerable is really terrifying. That feels like working without a net. And so I think it's easy to try to do something that feels right, even if it's not deep enough or holistic enough, or like really breaking down the stuff that is needing to get broken down. And so I think that's why we keep doing it, you keep doing the easy stuff, because you're like, well, maybe this will be good enough to get us through to the next quarter, the next year, the next whatever. But that's just kind of kicking the can down the road,
Do you find that the catalyst for wanting transformation often comes with a change of leadership, or is it other things that?
Oh, that's a really good question. So that's one catalyst for sure. I've seen it when a leader comes in and has been to the mountaintop, that phrase where they've been to the promised land and they've come back and they're telling everyone else about it, right? So a new leader comes in and they've worked in a product-led organization or product-led operating model. They've worked in an organization with healthy product teams where structure is defined in terms of outcomes, where prioritization is set from the top. Product teams, the product taxonomy is tied to that. And they come back and they're like, they come into a new organization. They're like, man, I have seen this work and I think it could work here. And they come with energy and verve and experience. And in some cases, that is why they've been hired, right? So think about like a technology or a product leader who's been hired in by a CEO or a COO and says, that's why we want you here. We know we need somebody who's done this before or who has been down this path to help lead us there. And so sometimes that really is the catalyst. But if we go back just one step, why do those executives make that hire in the first place instead of hiring someone to just run the status quo? I think the catalyst there is oftentimes that there's an understanding that what got that company to where they are is not going to be good enough to get them to the next level of performance, right? That customer expectations are changing faster than they know what to do with, right? They barely can keep up with what people want today. And then 10 minutes later, it changes and it changes and it changes. And so if you've got project plans that take 18 months to get into market and the expectations have changed 3 times over in that time of span or 18 times over, like how can you possibly keep up? Or they've got disruptors coming into their market or a board clamoring for what are you doing about AI and machine learning? I mean, it kind of doesn't matter now. There's always going to be something on that burning platform. I think that those are what's the catalyst behind those new talent hires and why leaders that have experience in these kinds of modern organizations, product-led organizations, are so in demand right now is because executive teams are saying, man, if you've done this before, can you come over here and help us do it?
So let's talk about that term about product-led or product operating model organizations.
Yep.
In these organizations, is the product team actually in charge? Is it led by product people?
Yeah.
Or is it led by people who use product thinking?
That's a really good question. I don't love that product-led word. I have almost all but dropped the lead because of that. I mean, I do still think that the concept of a product-led organization means something super specific in the vernacular of a product-led organization, just like marketing-led or sales-led, right? And that sort of thing. But a product operating model is really about that product thinking, right? So if you think about how Marty Kagan has been using that terminology since Transformed has come out, where it really is this idea of outcomes-oriented thinking. It is about the way that organizations from the top down really orient around products and experiences. That's really where my orientation is. And we joke at Tuckpoint that we are an operating model transformation organization. But if you want us to come in and implement a project management oriented operating model, we're not your gang. Like, we are a product operating model company. That is our bread and butter. And it's what we all believe in down to, our fingertips and our toes, because that really is our core belief and our core DNA. So Randy, you asked about whether or not it can be driven by the PM. And I think that's a really complicated question because yes, it has to be driven by really smart PMs that own the strategy around the products that are sold, but it has to be bigger than just the products that are sold. It has to be around the way that those products are delivered and serviced and sort of all of the things that are not just the sold product, but everything else. And then there's also the employee experience too. And I think that that's really critical. One of our clients is a financial services company, and they've organized an entire product organization around the digital advisor experience, the way that their financial advisors are set up. So an employee group are set up to service their clients, right? So that's a really, really specific way to think about products, but it's not super traditional, right? Because it's an employee group, right?
Jen, that's great. I want to follow up on that because there's the way of doing it for a SaaS company,
Yeah.
where the product and operations are pretty much the same thing.
Yes.
But then you were just talking about financial services and advisors, and I've worked in financial services with branches, and I've worked in old school companies with lots of operational things, and the product isn't just the digital thing anymore.
Right.
So in that case, is the product manager or is the product thinking that has to be at a more customer-based experience level, doesn't it? Or am I?
It does. And in that case, when we think about the operating model, Randy, there is we use this phrase that the entire organization is in the product operating model, but not everybody is on a product team, right? So there is thinking and mindset and behaviors that the entire organization has to be in terms of being aligned on how decisions get made and how priorities are set and the way technology and business pulls down the wall. So we stop thinking about technology and business and realize it's all business. But that operations team, there are operations people that are on product teams, but not everybody, right? Not every call service or call center person is on a product team, but their supervisors might be, to make sure that all of that technology that the call center agents need to, to do their job well and in a smart manner and with high touch, their supervisors or managers as SMEs may well be a part of a product team to make sure that that software, those platforms are designed to the best possible way to support those teams. So that's where you have to start to kind of peel apart, what does it mean to be in an operating model versus what does it mean to be on a product team? And that's where it can start to get a little bit tricky, but it's super worth it for these organizations because it's what enables speed and, value delivery and everything else. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And, you've led a lot of transformation projects in some very big organizations, financial services you mentioned, but also before you mentioned manufacturing. I'd love to know, from your point of view, what does it take to have a successful transformation?
Well, I think you have to think about it at a couple different levels. I think it requires a commitment from the executive level. I don't think you can sneak this in, right? It's not like trying to get my kids to eat vegetables where you can puree them and sneak them into the mac and cheese or into the brownies, right? You cannot do a sneaky transformation. Right. Which is why I think when Randy asked about can it be led by product managers, I think it can be to a certain extent, but you have to do it with the full faith and commitment of the executive team. They have to know that what they're getting themselves into. So that kind of clarity of, again, what we talked about at the top of the podcast, where are we going and why do we want to get there? That's the executive team's job, right? Is to really lay that out and to have a commitment to sort of the what and the why. And I think from the middle layer, I think there has to be sort of an active reimagining about what that partnership looks like in terms of how IT and business can come together to really work together in partnership versus in conflict. I think in many organizations, there is a real tension in middle management layers between those two organizations. And I don't know why, because it's all the business. Everybody wants the business. Everybody wants the company to succeed here. So really breaking down why that is and where that partnership can flourish. And then I think it really is looking, from sort of bottom up, top down, side to side, is where are the things holding the company back from being customer centric? And having those insights make it all the way from the customer all the way to engineering, and not having groups of people miss out on those insights and being outcomes oriented and really understanding what that means, being data driven and not having handoffs, right? Not having, well, I'm going to do this work over here in a silo and then I'll just hand it off to somebody else, but really looking at how does that end to end work happen? It requires a lot of transparency. It requires collaboration. And really, I think starting to look at wherever there are silos, you got to start to say, okay, we got to break those, right? And I think that's all super shorthandish, but that's where whenever I go in, I'm like, okay, tell me where the silos are, because we're going to start to bust the silos. tell me who is like, I'm fine, the problem's over there, because that's who I'm going to start to talk to first. Because, when you point, the three fingers point back at point back at you. That's the next place. I mean, it's kind of some of those things that you got to start to dig into and figure out why things are the way they are before you can figure out how to fix them.
And, we've talked about transformation taking quite a long time, I think, even in sort of smaller organizations as well. How do you support businesses in keeping up with their BAU and all the work that they have to do, as well as transforming? Because it's basically extra work, isn't it? And you can't sort of, I don't think most businesses can just stop operations and have a bit of a reset. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Sure. I do think that like the key is that you don't have to do everything everywhere all at once, like that movie says, right? Like you don't have to do everything. I think, again, you have to assess where you are, determine what is serving you in your current operating model, right? Keep that and figure out where to build on it. And you have to design for your culture, right? And then I think you have to determine how fast or slow do you want to go, right? So some organizations are impatient and they want to go super fast, and they're willing to see a dip in productivity or a dip in delivery to get to where they want to go faster. Other organizations are like, absolutely not. So we're going to go slower, right? Go slow to go fast. And I think you got to figure out which one of those you are as a company. But I think the most important thing is you got to also remember that if you only are adding in new ways of working, you're going to get bogged down pretty quick. Like that, we call that operating model debt. You can't just keep adding new things on top of. You got to figure out what you're going to start to shed in terms of dead weight, right? What things are not serving you in terms of, again, how teams are collaborating, how decisions are getting made and things like that. And so in that sort of upfront assessment, I think getting a clear picture of where you are and where you want to go is, what are you going to let go of, as much as what are you going to add? And I think that is a really freeing exercise. It's also super terrifying, but like it's a freeing exercise. And then deciding sort of at what points you're going to add something new, transfer work to it before you get rid of the old thing so that it feels like it's trusted, right? And you kind of start to step through it so that you're reducing risk. Again, I'm just going to keep quoting product management principles, right? But you're reducing risk that you're going to break anything, because you're just taking steps through the transformation and you're only going as fast as your organization can tolerate. I think it's a very pragmatic way to kind of go through things. I think that's the best way to go. I've been through these where it's, let's do it all as fast as possible. I've been through some where they've gone way too slow and they've lost momentum, but there's a lot of good, sort of paced transformations in the middle that have been wildly successful. And they have been so because they were right for the organization.
So speaking of those, Jen, I want to talk about in our last few minutes about the things to watch out for.
Sure.
But one of the things I've seen specifically is people have the best of intentions and they walk away from these meetings with an understanding of what they need to do locally, which isn't always aligned at the global level. How do we keep everyone aligned as we are changing priorities so that everyone is hearing the same thing and focusing on the same metrics or the same pieces of work or the same ways of getting there?
I mean, you just have to, I think, you have to say it and then say it again and then say it again and say it again. I mean, I think that the most essential thing in any transformation is having a team of champions, right, who are spearheading this work, whose job it is literally to talk about this until they are blue in the face. And they will feel like they are. Every team I've ever worked with on this is like 6 months in, they're like, we cannot go out and say this again. Like people will laugh at us because I show up in every meeting and I say the same 3 lines and I'm like, yep. And until people are quoting it back to you, they haven't heard it. They haven't heard you say those 3 things, right? So say it for another 3 months. And if people start saying it back to you in meetings, that's when you know that they've actually heard you. And then we can switch messages to the next one, right? It does just start to be, it feels ridiculous because you just think, I cannot keep saying these things. I cannot keep repeating myself. but it's what it takes, because nobody else in the company cares about it as much as that core team who's driving that transformation. And that, the CEO will feel that way. The CTO or whoever's sponsoring this work is going to feel that way. And you just have to keep with it. And so it becomes kind of an exercise in messaging, right? Which is sad to a certain extent, but it is. It's just relentless truth telling and messaging of like, this is what we're doing, this is why, and we're going to just keep saying, this is what we're doing, this is why.
Jen, are there any other big things to watch out for that people should take notice of?
I think, one of the things we talk about a lot is that we have to give people grace. I know there's lots of talk in our industry about psychological safety, giving people the freedom to fail before, to fail fast, all of that. I do think there's truth to it, that people are going to, new teams. So let's say you're standing up new product teams in new areas that have never done this before. People are going to suck at this before they get good at it, right? They're not going to be very good at creating roadmaps for their area. They're not going to know how, if they've never done it before, they're going to probably produce a couple really bad ones before they get good. And I think that is one of the things that in companies where people take a lot of pride in their work, they really like to feel good about themselves, all of a sudden they put out something and it's not like a home run right away. That can feel really scary. And I think starting to create an opportunity for people to kind of be bad at their job for the first time, maybe in their entire lives, I think that's really important. And that's not one that gets talked about. We talk about fail fast, but like that's like, oh, we took this big risk on this big new feature set or whatever. We don't always talk about like putting out a crappy first draft, right? Like sometimes that's what it takes over and over again until you get good at something. So I think that's really important. Leaders showing vulnerability of saying, you know what, I don't understand this and I need help, or I'm learning too. How can we all learn together? I think those are pieces that are super important as organizations go through these kinds of transformations.
Jen, this has been really, really interesting, and it's been so great to hear your perspective on everything. I'm sure lots of people will be resonating with everything that you've been saying. But for anyone who's going through a transformation now, be it leading a team through it or just experiencing it kind of on the front line, as you say, do you have any sort of final words of advice or maybe just support?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think curiosity is about the best thing ever, right? So being curious about what would it look like in my company? Or I think maybe we're already doing a product model in our company, but sort of over there, but not over here. And what does that really mean? I mean, I think just having curiosity and being willing to dig into things is like awesome. And don't be afraid to lean into that curiosity. That's my first thing. And if something's bugging you, like listen to your intuition, like, lean into that and figure out how you might be able to make it better. Because I think a lot of times we ignore our intuition, and I don't think that's great either. So
amazing. Thank you, Jen. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
You too.
Thanks, Jen.
The Product Experience hosts are me, Lily Smith, host by night and Chief Product Officer by day.
And me, Randy Silver, also host by night. And I spend my days working with product and leadership teams, helping their teams to do amazing work.
Luran Pratt is our producer and Luke Smith is our editor.
And our theme music is from product community legend Arnie Kittler's band, POW. Thanks to them for letting us use their track.